hear they're cracking down on the Jews. That must be scary.
We have to hide our allegiances, or else we're not gonna make it.
Meep, what I'm asking you to do is dangerous. If you get caught, you could get arrested, or even worse. I need your help hiding my family. You need to take your time to think it through.
No, I don't.
So obviously Otto and Meep are based on real life people. What was it like kind of bringing those people to life during such a really incredible period of their lives, doing incredible things, and also kind of still bringing a bit of yourself to the role?
I mean, obviously you feel like a certain amount of responsibility when you're playing a real person, and also I think this is such a heavy part of a history, you know, that means a lot to so many people. So, you know, I felt the weight of that a bit as well. But on the flip side, I think that, you know, Meep really is a kind of every woman and is very relatable to me and, you know, a lot of young women. So that kind of made it a bit easier. Like the fact that she never really wanted to be put on a pedestal. She never wanted to be called a hero. She kind of wanted us all to see a bit of ourselves in her. So, yeah, it was kind of getting that balance of bringing a bit of myself to the role, but also kind of, you know, respectfully honouring, you know, her and the facts and the weight of that part of history as well.
It's always tricky, you know. You do feel the responsibility, like the responsibility to the person who existed, their family, and then the millions of people who have an idea about who they were. But I try to relax into the idea that what I'm really responsible for is the narrative that has been given to me, which is Tony and Joan's script, and for using that character to kind of express my piece of it, which makes it easier because it's a lot to take on, you know, particularly somebody as influential and as important to the world as Meep.
Yeah. I mean, your transformation into Otto is just incredible because you look unrecognizable. What was it like kind of trying to get into the physicality of him? Because the whole body language is different. Everything is just completely different.
You know, 3 hours in prosthetic makeup, like having all that latex applied to your head will change you in many ways, visually, emotionally, and spiritually. But, you know, I had a great scene partner in Belle that was just sometimes acting really is like tennis, and she hits the ball remarkably well. I think there was a piece early on about Otto's being German that touched me, that he was proud of being German, and that was his identity, and that because he's Jewish, he's forced to be Jewish. And what a horrible thing to be forced to be something that you don't identify with. He wasn't a particularly religious person. He was very proud of being German. He loved the clothes, he loved the food, he loved the life. But it was taken away from him because someone said, no, you're a Jew. You'll only ever be a Jew. And that piece felt powerful to me. I remember that when I was a kid and my mom told me about the Holocaust, I remember thinking to myself, well, why couldn't I just say I'm not Jewish? Oh. Which is such an innocent thing to say, but so simple. It's like, well, why do I have to be that? Couldn't I be something else? It's like, no, you have to be that. And that you sort of come full circle and you say, well, I want to be that and, you know.
Yeah.
I want to be that, I want to be proud to be that, but I also want to be this. I'm actually a ball player, or I'm actually a cook, or I'm actually a talented musician, you know?
There are so many layers to us, and so it's such a horrible time.
Yep.
Obviously, the story of Anne Frank has been told and retold and retold, but this isn't quite that. What kind of other nuances did you want to kind of bring to that story to kind of open people's eyes, I guess?
I mean, I think we liked just the idea that the accounts of Anne Frank's particular story are told through her very unique perspective as a teenager. It's what makes the story special.
Yeah.
But also the lens through which she's looking at these events is a teenage lens. And, you know, then we hear these very serious historical accounts of the war that are sort of very adult and very staid and, you know, historical. And in between, there was this 20-something coming of age, figuring out her own power, the limits of what she was able to do, like breaking through those barriers and finding that she actually was, you know, figuring out what she was actually capable of and and also falling in love and also having these other things. It was just a unique perspective that we hadn't seen, but that also felt really youthful in its own way and filled with the vibrancy and vitality that I think is why Anne's story has become canon. You know, it's like people want to feel the life, the humanity, the specificity of one person's experience of this, not from an outside-in perspective, but just like being a person, going out, doing things, making choices, choices that can seem small but have a big impact, or don't pan out, or just going through your life every day and deciding to participate in doing the right thing or not. So we wanted to show this through a young woman and have that perspective, not as young as a teenager and not limited to the annex, but be able to kind of compare the world outside and the world inside, to see it from this holistic perspective, but also the perspective of like a young, funny, vibrant, relatable person.
You guys cover some themes that would be considered quite progressive for the time, the era that you're in, like 30s, 40s. I think there's divorce, homosexuality, like even just women wanting to have careers, and Meep's forwardness with Jan. What was the importance in trying to getting those themes across in a small light?
Well, they were real, first of all. We wanted to tell, Meep was interesting to us for a lot of reasons, but those were some of the reasons. That here was this, young woman who, from her account, had no interest in getting married. She loved Jan, but getting married and being a wife and having a child were not her drive, you know what I mean? And that was progressive, and we thought that was really interesting.
True. Yeah. And I feel like a lot of shows that would be, or movies that would be about that would be what the show is about. Like it would be about a woman who was going up against some system that made her do a thing and she decided to not. But this is a woman doing a whole other set of things that had nothing to do with how progressive she was in these social ways. But she just happened to be that.
Well, and finding out that Jan had been married, when we were doing our research, was really interesting. And
Mr. Frank had to go and vouch for them to Mrs. Stoppelman because they were living in sin. And she was like, they're not married. He's married to someone else. How can I let them stay in my home? And he was like, no. It's very complicated, and they'll resolve it. And so, I think that they were... And famously, Meep and Jan never talked about the fact that he was married.
Okay.
So that's something that we discovered. And I think, obviously, as you get older, you try and, the more kind of sordid parts of your past, you try and, put those aside. But also you come upon a story like Cafe De Mange and William Arandeus and the fact that the first gay bar in Europe was this hotbed of the resistance. And in your research, you read that and you're like, well, we have to tell that story.
Was that the kind of I want to call it almost like a speakeasy that you kind of feed in there? And I was like, this is
a real
same-sex
thing.
couples. And then as you'll see when you get into episode 5, that place becomes the breeding ground for this big action that they're going to take against the Nazis. And I read this quote, because Willem was arrested afterwards and put to death by the Nazis, and he said to his lawyer, "Let it be known that homosexuals are not cowards." And he said this in 1944, and that those people were an integral part of that story.
I did want to touch upon that because it's not often that you get to see that in, war movies about Nazi Germany. You don't get to hear the homosexual storylines and that fed into this. So I had no knowledge of how very real a part they played in it. Why was this something that you were really keen on making sure came across in the story that people perceived to be about Anne Frank?
Well, we wanted to talk about, Meep and Jan were just two people who were doing resistance work. And we wanted to talk, but Amsterdam, a lot of people were. And we wanted to talk about a lot of different people doing that kind of work. And so the idea of Cafe De Mange, where it was this homosexual bar, and in the basement they had guns, and
they were hiding people
upstairs, and they had this owl light in the window that when Nazis would come in, so Nazis weren't supposed to go to the red light district because sex would
They were, and also they
distract
were
them.
morally pure.
But they would. And so the owner of the bar, when Nazis were in there, would turn on the owl light to warn people not to come in because Nazis were in. So there were all these amazing things about this place that we wanted to talk about. And so one way we did it was to create, Meep had these 5 brothers and sisters, or 5 brothers, right? And we don't know that one of them was gay, but as Tony likes to say, statistically speaking,
one of them had to
Probably
be.
one of them
and
was
so
at least curious.
that was a way to bring Cafe De Mange and to have Jan be sent there by his boss to get help. So we just used that story that we wanted to tell. We wanted to tell the story of Willem Arandeus and that action of burning the records office. But we know that Jan and Meep didn't actually go to the burning of the records office, but we put them adjacent to it.
Yeah.
And also, it's one of those things that I think what strikes me personally is in certain parts of the United States now, there is this violent, virulent anti-trans mania going on, and I think there is a belief from some people that this is a new thing, that homosexuality is a new thing, people being transgender is a new thing. And one of our responsibilities as storytellers is to say, this is not a new thing. This has always been there. It has always been a part of pretty much everyone's family. It just wasn't talked about as much.
Well, Meep's quite a progressive character for the time that she was in. So it's really interesting that she's brought to life in that way. You would consider her to behave differently. What was it like, what was your impression of Meep when you read her on the page for the first
obviously,
time?
I think she's a completely epic human and such an inspiration. But yeah, it's that contemporariness of her that's what we really wanted to tap in to make this show feel fresh and relatable and a kind of new take on a story that we know so well. I think a way into the history is kind of having this lead character be someone that people can relate to just on the minutiae of the kind of everyday of her life, you know, being young, newly married couple and having arguments with your husband and, I don't know, going out and partying with your friends, but still having said yes and, you know, doing this kind of really intense thing. I think that's the way, that was a very clever way into this story that kind of...
people understand, like, a life interrupted. You know what I mean? That's 100%. The thing that I think people have a hard time relating to, even when they watch the news and they see the rockets hitting Ukraine and things like that. Just like the part that you do understand is like the simple human aspects of their lives.
Yeah.
Like now that mom is taking care of those 2 kids by herself and all she's got is like 2 plastic shopping bags from her home. That kind of stuff people can relate to. I think that sort of performance, for me, did that like, here's a woman who's coming into herself and has just fallen in love and met this person. That's sort of the main story, and it helps you. I don't know, I really appreciated that all the war and everything else, and the Jews and the Franks and the Nazis were all peripheral. It kind of helped.
Obviously, your characters have such a special bond. What was it like kind of working on that bond between the two of you to create that and bring that to life to the screen?
I mean, it was so easy and such a pleasure to work with Liev because he's such a brilliant actor. And I mean, like he was saying before, we really did want to play and explore the scenes in a similar way. We definitely have similar processes, I would say, and we got along really well. But yeah, it was an incredibly interesting dynamic to explore. I mean, it's quite a modern and contemporary relationship. I do, in my eyes, see these people as real, true friends, best friends even. And, you know, for that friendship to exist between a young woman and a man 20 years her senior at that time, I think, was, very modern and probably a side of this story that people don't know about that much.
What was it like emotionally kind of filming A Small Light? What was it like kind of connecting to the script? Did it have an emotional tone on you? Because it's quite heavy material.
Yeah, I mean, you know, even filming in our set of the annex, which was pretty much a direct replica of the actual place, even that was intense and claustrophobic. I mean, we can't even imagine what it was like for people to actually live in there for 2 years in the darkness, like. And in terms, it was emotional, but also we really connected as a cast. And I don't want to say like we had a good time because obviously, you know.
We did.
Yeah.
We did.
You found the joy in it.
She was the ringleader, and we found all the best restaurants in Prague and Amsterdam as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that's important. That's how you do it.
Yeah.
That's how we do it. It's no coincidence that on the jobs that maybe are emotionally harder and darker, you tend to come together as a cast. You tend to find the brighter aspects of what you're doing and
Otherwise,
where
you
you're
drive
doing
yourself
it.
into the ground, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
Obviously, the story of Anne Frank has been told and retold, but this isn't quite that. What kind of other nuances did you want to kind of bring to that story to kind of open people's eyes, I guess?
I mean, I think we liked just the idea that the accounts of Anne Frank's particular story are told through her very unique perspective as a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
It's what makes the story special.
Yeah.
But also the lens through which she's looking at these events is a teenage lens.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, then we hear these very serious historical accounts of the war that are sort of very adult and very staid and, historical. And in between, there was this 20-something coming of age, figuring out her own power, the limits of what she was able to do, like breaking through those barriers and finding that she actually was, figuring out what she was actually capable of, and also falling in love and also having these other things. It was just a unique perspective that we hadn't seen, but that also felt really youthful in its own way and filled with the vibrancy and vitality that I think is why Anne's story has become canon.
Yeah.
It's like people want to feel the life, the humanity, the specificity of one person's experience of this, not from an outside-in perspective, but just like being a person, going out, doing things, making choices, choices that can seem small but have a big impact, or don't pan out, or just going through your life every day and deciding to participate in doing the right thing or not. Yeah. We wanted to show this through a young woman and have that perspective, not as young as a teenager and not limited to the annex, but be able to kind of compare the world outside and the world inside, to see it from this holistic perspective, but also the perspective of like a young, funny, vibrant, relatable person.
Well, and also there's this, everybody knows Anne Frank. We discovered in our research that after the war, Otto Frank lived with Meep and Jan for 7 years. So that was striking. Because she started as his employee. They're from different classes, and they became family.
Yeah.
And so that was something that drove us. Like, what happened there? How did that happen? How did they become so close?
Right.
Can I ask, did you come to the story of Meep and Jan through Anne Frank's diary, or was that something that you would? How did you come across it?
Tony and I have always been, like many people, interested in Anne Frank's story, and when a new movie or a new thing would come out, we'd always watch it. And when Anne Frank Remembered, which is a documentary, came out in the 90s, we watched it, and Meep was featured in it, talking about her role in finding the diary, in being an ambassador of the diary. And she was such an interesting character. We noticed it back in the 90s. And when we went to Amsterdam about 6 or 7 years ago with our family, just her being a young person, saying yes to Otto Frank immediately, struck us as an interesting way into a story. Because you say yes, but then you probably go home and you go, wait.
Yeah.
What did I agree to?
Yeah.
Yeah, I had heard about Meep. I just knew her name through the diary, and also just growing up Jewish. It was like a story, and my mom had lived in Holland for a while, so it was just I knew her name, and I knew Jan's name. But yeah, I think I always pictured them as, 90-somethings who had done a noble thing, because when I was a kid, they were that age. And then as I got older and kind of realized that actually she was young, and then I became older than she was at the time, I'm like, oh, actually she was just like a young person. Yeah. That became really interesting to me, and yeah, I think part of what we want to do with the show is to show not just the greatest hits of the most heroic things that they did, but also all of the real complicated feelings they had about doing what they did. Like the fact that you would go home, as heroic as a person can be, they still go home and are tired at the end of the day, or they argue with their partners, or they are like deepest, darkest thoughts are like, oh
Their
my God,
mother is mad. Why do you never come visit us anymore?
why do they lie to their, they fight with their friends, and just moments of actually wondering, oh my God, I have a cold today. I don't feel like going over there. I just don't feel like it. I know I have to do it. I know it's the right thing, but man, I'm really tired. I wish I could just take a nap, Like those really real feelings that are definitely a part of people doing these noble things. Like for an audience to see those real human feelings about doing heroic things makes them feel like they could be like a Meep or Jan, which is what Meep and Jan wanted. They didn't want to be these like
put up on a
pedestal for people to say, oh my God, we'll never be that noble. They wanted people to see themselves in them. And it's sort of a bit of a catch-22 because we make this show so that we can show a relatable, you could do this too, but also we're making the show about these particular people while also to like put their story out there, but at the same time make their story feel like it could be any of our stories. So there's like a bit of complexity there, but yeah.